Hi, good morning. It's wonderful to be back here. Wonderful to see you here. I'm teaching this class because I wish a class like this had been taught when I was sitting in your seats as an undergrad here. This does not mean that it's a class you wish to be taught, nor does it mean that it's the right class for you. What I hope to do in the next couple of lectures is give you an idea of what this class is about so that you can decide whether or not it is for you. I came here in 1992 and started off as a computer science concentrator, and then had a mini epiphany halfway through my sophomore year. I realized that I was in a wonderful place with wonderful students around me, wonderful teachers. I was doing well academically. I was doing well in athletics. I was playing varsity squash at the time. I was doing well socially. Everything was going well, except for the fact that I was unhappy. And I didn't understand why. And it was then, in a matter of moments, that I decided that I had to find out why and become happier. And that's when I switched my concentration from computer science to philosophy and psychology, with a single question: how can I become happier? Over time, I did become happier. What had contributed most to my happiness was when I encountered a new emerging field. At that time didn't have the name that it has today, but essentially research that falls under or within the field of positive psychology. Positive psychology, studying it, applying the ideas to my life has made me significantly happier. It continues to make me happier. And it was when I realized the impact that it had on me that I decided to share it with others. That's when I decided that I wanted to be a teacher and teach this field. So this is Positive Psychology, Psychology 1504. And we'll be exploring this new, relatively new and fascinating field. And hopefully we will be exploring more than the field, ourselves. When I first taught this class, it was back in 2002, I taught it as a seminar and had 8 students. 2 dropped out. That left me with 6. The year after, the class became slightly larger. I had over 300 students. And then the third year when I taught it, which was the last time, I had 850 students in the class, making it at that point the largest course at Harvard. And that's when the media became interested, because they wanted to understand why. They wanted to understand this phenomenon that here you have a class that's larger than Introduction to Economics. How could that be? So I was invited by the media for interviews, whether it was newspapers, radio, television. And I started to notice a pattern during those interviews. So I would walk into the interview, we'd have the interview, and afterward the producer or the interviewer would walk me out and say something to the effect of, well, thank you, Tal, for the interview, but you know, I expected you to be different. And I would ask as nonchalantly as I could, of course, as if I didn't really care, but had to ask anyway, how different? And they would say, well, you know, we expected you to be more outgoing. Next interview, at the end of the interview, same thing. Thank you for doing the interview, but, you know, Tal, I expected you to be different. And once again, nonchalantly, of course, I would ask, so how different? And he or she would say, well, you know, we expected you to be less introverted. Next interview, same thing. How different? Well, you know, more extroverted, more outgoing. Next interview, well, you know, less shy. Because, you know, I get very nervous in interviews. Interview after interview, literally dozens. More outgoing, more cheerful, less introverted, more extroverted, and on and on. But here is the best one. So this is one of the local channels here in around Boston. Going to the interview, we have quite a long interview, which I thought was actually pretty good. And at the end of the interview, the interviewer, who's a very jolly guy, walks me out, puts his hand on my shoulder, and says, "Tal, thank you very much for doing the interview." And then the usual comes. "But you know, Tal, I expected you to be different." And I said, "How different?" And now, just so that you understand, by this time, my self-esteem is shot. But still, with some semblance of nonchalance, I ask, "How different?" And he looks at me and says, "Well, I don't know, Tal, I expected you to be taller." Taller? What, 5'7" or, okay, 5'6.5" is not enough to teach happiness? And I thought about it, and I thought about it a lot, the whole pattern from the beginning. And I think I understand why they expected someone different. You see, they had to explain to themselves, as well as the audience, how come this class is larger than Introduction to Economics? And the way to explain it must be that the teacher is very outgoing, extremely charismatic, very cheerful, an extrovert, and of course, tall. Well, there was one L missing there, but yeah, if only. So, the problem though is that they were looking in the wrong place for the explanation. In other words, they were looking at the messenger. Where they needed to look at was at the message. Now, how do I know that? You see, because I see other positive psychology classes on other campuses around the country and around the world. There are over 200 campuses here in the United States that teach positive psychology. On almost every campus where this class is taught, it's either one of the or the largest class. It's about the message. I see more and more organizations taking up positive psychology in their, as consultant companies. Some of the big consulting companies are taking it on. More and more high schools are introducing positive psychology classes. Elementary schools are introducing it. Governments around the world are expressing an interest in this new and emerging field. Why? Because it works. Because it really works. You see, this whole realm of life flourishing, of happiness, of well-being has been, until recently, dominated by the self-help movement. What do we have in the self-help movement? We have books that are very interesting, that are very accessible. We have speakers who are very outgoing, very charismatic and tall, attracting in the masses into these workshops and seminars and lectures. But, and there is a very big but here, many of these books, many of these workshops and seminars lack substance. Very often over-promising and under-delivering. So these are the 5 things you need to know to be happy. The 3 things to be the great leader. The 1 secret of success, happiness, and the perfect love life. Over-promising, under-delivering. On the other hand, we have academia. What do we have in academia? We have a lot of rigor, a lot of substance. We have data that's analyzed, reanalyzed, and meta-analyzed. Things that actually work. Good stuff. But, and there is also a very big but here, very few people refereed academic journals. I mean, think about it. How many people outside of this room, of course, have read the last 12 issues of the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology? Well, most people don't even know what that means. The head of my PhD program actually estimated that the average academic journal article is read by 7 people. You know, and that includes the author's mother. So, and I say it half in jest, but it's actually really sad, because, certainly sad for me as an academic, because these things are good, they're important, things that make a difference, can make even more of a difference, but not accessible to most people. And this is where positive psychology comes in. And this is also where this class comes in. The explicit mandate of positive psychology, as well as of this class, is to create a bridge between the ivory tower and Main Street. In other words, it is to bring the rigor, the substance, the empirical foundation, the science from academia, and merge it with the accessibility of the self-help or New Age movement. In a way, the best of both worlds. And this explains the popularity of the field of positive psychology. Science that works. This class will be taught on two levels. The first level, it will be taught like any other class in psychology or any of the classes that you have taken here. You'll be introduced here to studies, to research, to rigorous academic work. You will be writing a paper, an academic paper. You'll be taking exams, just like every other class. But then it will also be taught at a second level, which is for every paper that you'll read, every paper that you will write, you will always be thinking, okay, so how can I take these ideas and apply them to my life? How can I apply them to my relationship? How can I apply them to my community? Two levels, the academic, applied. I did not just introduce, whether it's in the readings or in lectures, ideas just because they're interesting for the sake of the idea. It's always an idea that is both rigorous and can be applied. Just a few words about housekeeping. Some of the questions that I've already received from you before the class started. So this, unfortunately, is the last time that I'm teaching positive psychology or any other class for that matter at Harvard. Hopefully, within 2 years, probably not next year, but within 2 years, there will be positive psychology class offered, but I certainly cannot guarantee it. About feedback and questions. If you have any questions, if anything is not clear, if you agree or disagree with something, email me or email your TF, and we'll always respond. Sometimes, if the question is asked by enough people, we'll respond to it publicly, always anonymously, unless you specify specifically that your name can be mentioned. But sometimes, you may be listening to a lecture, and then halfway through it, there's an emergency. There is something that you really have to ask, something that cannot wait. In that case, please just put your hand out, because it's like when you just have to go to the bathroom, just can't stop, can't wait, and when you gotta go, you gotta go. So we'll take a positive psychology break for that, and just stop me halfway through, and I'll answer any question. All the PowerPoints, as well as the videos of the classes, will be online, will be available within a couple of days. Well, the PowerPoints will be available before, except for this lecture, will be available before, so that you can use them in class. The videos, unfortunately, cannot be made available before. We tried, couldn't figure it out. So they will be available within a day or two after. And the reason why they're up there, first of all, I do prefer that you attend lecture. I do prefer that you're physically here. You get things in the energy of the room with so many students that you wouldn't get just in front of your computer. But the reason why I do put them up is so that you have an opportunity, if you want to see it again, or if you happen to miss a class, that's perfectly fine. And also because, and this is also the reason why the PowerPoints are always available, I want you to be engaged in the material. I want you to be engaged in whatever it is that we're discussing in class, not necessarily thinking about getting down every word that I say on paper, remembering everything, memorizing everything. I want you to take, rather than passive notes of writing down what it says on the PowerPoint or every word that I say, I'd like you to take active notes. And that means being engaged with the material. For example, if you hear something, an idea that you say, oh, that's interesting, star it, write it down. Or, okay, I think I'm going to start applying this. Write it down. Or, I want to tell my mom about this later. Or I want to talk to my roommates or my team about this idea. Write it down. Active note-taking as opposed to passive note-taking for two reasons. First of all, as I said, this class is a class about making a difference in people's lives. I would not be teaching the class just for its academic beauty, though there is a lot of academic beauty in this field. So write down if you have ideas that you think you can apply. The second reason why we should do that is because it's more, you'll remember more, better retention, better understanding of the material if you're actively engaged as opposed to just taking down passive notes. Throughout the class, starting next week, we'll take what I call time-ins as opposed to time-outs. It's like a time-out. It's a time where we stop the class and you look inward. And this is literally a time of silence in the class. I will stop for a minute or two, and you'll have a chance either to just stare at me or anyone else, or think about what we've just discussed, or have a guiding question that I will provide you that you will address during the class. The reason why I have time-ins, and this is something that I'm introducing this year for the first time, we didn't have it last time, is because over the last 2 years since I last taught it, I've done a lot of work in the area of silence. I've read a lot of research in this area about the importance of quiet times, whether it's in a class, in a lecture, whether it is at home, whether it's for a leader in a business, for a relationship, for children, starting from preschools. Now, many of you, as you're going through these time-ins, if you decide to take the class, may think, well, is this what I'm paying $40,000 a year for? To sit in a class and be quiet? Well, first of all, it will only be a minute or two at a time, maybe once or twice a lecture. But second, it may be the most important thing that you take from this class, the notion of embracing stillness. Let me read to you an excerpt from a study that was run by 2 MIT professors. By the way, all the names that I read that are not on the PowerPoint, you don't need to remember or write down. This is just for your edification. But so David Foster and Matthew Wilson, both of them are from MIT, and did the following study that I think confirms the importance of a time-in, time to look inside. What they did was they scanned the brains of rats while they were in a maze and after they went through the maze. And here is what they found. What the results suggest is that while there certainly is some record of your experience as it is occurring, in other words, when they were doing the maze, the actual learning, when you try to figure out what was important, what should I keep and throw away, that happens after the fact, during periods of quiet, wakeful introspection. What they showed was rats who went through the maze and then went through the maze again and again learned far less than rats who took time aside, chilled out a little bit after a maze, had a margarita, experienced, embraced stillness. This has implications, and they showed implications to human beings as well, not only those who are on the rat race, all human beings. So what they say is that replay might constitute a general mechanism of learning and memory, both learning, understanding, as well as memory, retention. When we reflect, when we replay the material, we're much more likely to retain, to remember what we have just been through. So the importance of time aside is cannot be overemphasized. In his wonderful book on teaching, Parker Palmer, it's called The Courage to Teach, says the following: words are not the sole medium of exchange in teaching and learning. We educate with silence as well. Silence gives us a chance to reflect on what we have said and heard. In authentic education, silence is treated as a trustworthy metric for the inner work students must do, a medium for learning of the deepest sort. Silence is something that's missing from our culture. I know that many of you have probably read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert M. Pirsig. Well, he has a second book out, less well known, called Lila. And Lila is an anthropological study of Native Americans. And what he does there is compare their culture to Americans from European ancestry. And one of the distinguishing characteristics between these two cultures is their approach towards silence. What he found was when he went and sat around with Native Americans, they would sit around the fire and hang out for 2-3 hours without saying a word. Just sit around, look at one another, smile, have a good time, introspect, just be there for hours. Whereas he points out that in our culture we feel very uncomfortable with the absence of words, with the absence of sound or noise. We have to fill up all the gaps. And this is an important cultural difference, and we pay a price for this lack of stillness. A price that I will talk about a lot when I talk about relationships, when I talk about virtue and morality, and when we talk about happiness and well-being in general.